My name is Emily Walker, and the day my father whispered, "You've always been the one I'm proud of," I knew I was about to lose him, and more than just to illness. While I stayed by his side, my brother Aaron laughed off the call, too busy for family melodrama. But when the will was read, and I got nothing but a crumbling old farm while Aaron inherited our entire legacy, something inside me snapped. This isn't just a story about inheritance. It's about betrayal, secrets, and the quiet revenge that follows. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching this from. Drop your city or country in the comments. I'm really curious to see how far this story reaches. It was a Tuesday morning painted in shades of gray. Rain whispered against the windows of my small home in North Carolina, clinging to the glass like it, too, didn't want to let go. I sat on the edge of my bed, the phone clenched in one hand, knuckles pale, thumb hesitating over the call button. I hit dial anyway. It rang and rang. Finally, Aaron answered. His voice came through crisp, cold, and clipped like the blade of a well-sharpened knife. "What?" he barked. I cleared my throat, trying to keep the tremble out of it. "Dad doesn't have much time left," I said. He wants to see you." There was a pause too long, and then came the sound of a breath being exhaled with exaggerated irritation. "You're serious," Aaron said. Then he laughed, not kindly. "I'm not flying back for some melodrama. I've got meetings, a life." "He's dying, Aaron." My voice cracked despite everything I tried. "Please." "No, I said goodbye 2 years ago. That was enough." Click, silence. I stared at the screen, still glowing with his name, and it was as if something hollowed out in my chest. My thumb hovered for a second, wanting to call back, to scream, to beg, but I didn't. I stood, grabbed my raincoat, and drove the 11 miles through slick, winding roads to the hospice center that had become my second home. Dad's room was dim. The curtains were drawn halfway. Machines hummed softly, a cruel contrast to the man they were attached to. What used to be a booming voice that filled our home was now a raspy whisper, barely louder than the wind. I sat down next to him, gently took his hand, and whispered, "He's not coming." Dad's eyes fluttered open. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. He simply looked at me, his lips curving up ever so slightly. "I figured," he rasped, and then after a pause, "You've always been the one I'm proud of." Something inside me shattered, because I had spent my entire life trying to be the one. The reliable daughter, the fixer, the glue, and Aaron disappeared when things got hard. Dad squeezed my fingers weakly. "You stayed." "Of course I did," I whispered back, tears burning the corners of my eyes. "You're my dad." He smiled again, weaker this time. "That farm, remember the summers we spent there? You loved it." "Yeah," I said, blinking away a memory of sun-warmed hay bales and dusty lemonade jars. "I loved it because you were there." His chest rose and fell, shallow, uneven. I sat with him for another hour, reading from a newspaper he couldn't focus on, fluffing his pillow when he winced, dabbing his forehead with a damp cloth. Time moved like syrup, slow, sticky, and uncertain. Eventually, he drifted into sleep again. The room, filled with the soft hiss of oxygen and the low patter of rain against the glass, fell quiet. I stepped out into the hallway and stared down at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Aaron's silence wasn't surprising. It was calculated. And it was cruel. That evening, as I sat in my car outside the hospice, the clouds broke open fully and rain poured in sheets. I gripped the steering wheel, watching water streak down the windshield like tears. I had a bad feeling, not just about Dad, but about what would happen after, because people show their true colors when money's on the table. And my brother, he'd already shown me his. A week passed. Hospice time doesn't follow clocks, it follows breath. 1, 2, pause. And then the wait to see if there's another. I'd begun counting them in the stillness, each one a small mercy. On the 7th morning, my father was still breathing. Barely. His fingers curled gently around mine, but his eyes stayed closed now, as if he was saving all his energy for some final act. Outside his window, the rain had stopped but left behind a sky the color of wet slate. The kind that makes you nostalgic for things you haven't even lost yet. I watched him sleep, thinking about everything he never said to Aaron. Everything Aaron never cared to hear. He hadn't shown up, not once. No call, no email, no check-in to ask how things were going, just silence. And yet here I was, sitting beside a man who had flaws, sure, but who had tried, who never missed a birthday, who helped me fix my first car with grease-stained fingers and patient guidance, who called me kiddo until his voice went hoarse and cancer made talking feel like a mountain. I brushed a hand through his thinning hair and whispered, "You deserved better than being ignored." The hospice room smelled like antiseptic and time gone stale. But it was our time now, and I wasn't going to let Aaron's absence taint what was left of it. My mind wandered to the missed calls and birthdays Aaron had shrugged off over the past 2 years. He hadn't visited even when Dad was first hospitalized. Not when they removed part of his lung. Not after the second diagnosis. Not when we learned it was terminal. "He's always been selfish," I murmured, voice barely above the hum of the oxygen machine. A nurse entered quietly with a fresh blanket and a small nod. She gave me a gentle smile that said everything without needing words. The kind people reserve for someone losing what little family they have left. After she left, I stood and walked over to the corner of the room where the family photo hung on the wall, one of the last decent ones before Dad started to look sick. In it, Aaron's smile was all teeth. Fake. Mine was timid. I remember that day. He had shown up an hour late and then left before dessert. I studied the image, then turned back to my father and whispered, "I don't know what's going to happen when you're gone, but I promise you this, I won't let Aaron erase you. Or pretend he was here when he wasn't." I leaned in close and added, "You matter, Dad, and I'll make sure the world knows that." He didn't move, didn't open his eyes, but his hand, weak as it was, squeezed mine ever so faintly. That squeeze felt like a blessing, or a contract. Later that night, as I sat in the hallway sipping stale coffee from a paper cup, I replayed that phone call from Aaron again in my mind. I'm not flying back for some melodrama. It wasn't just callous. It was strategic. Aaron didn't want the responsibility. He didn't want to see the truth in our father's eyes that he was the one who disappointed him, that he didn't measure up. But I did. I always had. I realized something that night, sitting alone in that corridor of flickering fluorescent lights and nurses whispering shift changes. When the will is read, because we both knew that moment was coming, Aaron wouldn't want memories. He'd want power, control, assets. And I had a sinking feeling he'd already found a way to get what he wanted, to cut me out before the ink was even dry. But what Aaron didn't know, what none of them knew, is that I wasn't the same girl who stayed quiet at Thanksgiving when he made passive-aggressive jokes, or the one who swallowed her hurt when he skipped my college graduation. No, I had learned to endure, and more importantly, I had learned to remember. So while my father slept that fragile sleep of those who have seen the end coming, I sat beside him and made a silent vow. I would honor him, I would not be erased. And whatever Aaron thought he could take, he'd have to fight me for it. The morning of the funeral arrived cloaked in gray. Thick clouds pressed against the sky like they, too, were mourning. I dressed in silence, choosing a simple black dress, one my father had once called elegant in a way that doesn't beg for attention. That was the kind of woman he raised me to be, graceful, grounded, unshakable in storms. Even this one. At the cemetery, I stood alone by the grave as the pastor read quiet words over the closed casket. Aaron arrived 20 minutes late. His arrival was as loud as his absence had been silent. Shiny shoes, tailored coat, and a smirk he'd perfected in boardrooms. He strolled past mourners, sunglasses still on, and dramatically laid a single red rose atop the casket as if he were the grieving son who had held Dad's hand at the end. Not the one who never came. Not the one who laughed off my plea. I didn't look at him. Not really. But I felt his presence like an itch, something persistent and unearned. The burial was brief. Rain threatened but never quite fell, holding itself back like everyone else holding their tears. Afterward, I found myself seated across from Aaron again, but this time it was in the law office of our father's longtime attorney, Mr. Wallace. The air inside the room was stuffy, the curtains too heavy for the midday light. Shelves lined with leather-bound books did little to comfort me. My throat tightened, my hands folded tightly in my lap. Aaron sat across the table, legs spread like a man preparing to receive something he already believed was his. He looked over at me and grinned. "This should be quick," he said, spinning a sleek car key around his finger like a magician waiting to pull a rabbit out of a hat. I didn't respond. I had nothing to say to someone who treated grief like a business deal. Mr. Wallace cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and opened a folder with a quiet reverence that made my heart skip. "This is the last will and testament of Frank Raymond Walker," he began, voice steady. "Updated and notarized 6 months before his passing." Aaron's eyebrows shot up. 6 months? Funny, I don't remember him saying anything about changes. That's because he never visited, I thought. I kept my gaze forward. Mr. Wallace continued. "The will reads as follows. To my son, Aaron Walker, I leave full ownership and management of Walker Timber Company, inclusive of all operating assets, accounts, and current holdings." Aaron beamed. "And to my daughter, Emily Walker." My heart paused. I stared at the edge of the table, suddenly very aware of every breath in the room. "I leave the property located on Henson Mill Road, known commonly as the East Ridge Farm." Silence. I blinked. The East Ridge Farm, that place was falling apart. It hadn't been lived in for over a decade. The roof was bowed, the fence caved in. It was a skeleton of what it once was. "That's it?" I asked before I could stop myself. "That's all." Mr. Wallace gave me a somber nod. "That's what the document states, yes," Aaron laughed. "An old shack, that's your prize," he said, spinning the key faster now. "Guess Dad really wanted me to run the show." I wanted to scream. Not for the money, not even for the company, but because this didn't make sense. Dad told me I was the one he was proud of. So why give Aaron everything? Why leave me a broken-down memory? I glanced down at my hands. They were steady, but inside something was churning. I met Aaron's gaze for the first time that day and gave him a look that made him pause. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. And I wasn't done. Not even close. As we stood to leave, Aaron smirked, patting me on the shoulder as he passed. "Don't be bitter, Em. You know business was never really your thing." He walked out with swagger in his step, leaving behind a room that suddenly felt a little smaller. But that seed he planted, the one he thought was mockery, took root. Because here's the thing about women like me. We don't break. We bend. We breathe. We rebuild. And sometimes we wait. I picked up the small envelope containing the deed to East Ridge and walked out of the office. The air outside was colder now. Sharper. More alive. I didn't know what was waiting for me at that decaying farmhouse. But something in my gut told me this story wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, I found myself gripping the steering wheel of my old Corolla as it groaned up the narrow gravel path leading to East Ridge Farm. The sky overhead stretched wide and moody. Cotton clouds smeared across a canvas of faded blue. In the passenger seat, Jenny sat with her arms folded and one eyebrow raised, her skeptical expression barely masked behind aviator sunglasses. Jenny Monroe had been my best friend since we were 12, the kind of person who always said exactly what she was thinking, usually before thinking it through. "This is it," she muttered, squinting at the sagging roof and leaning porch ahead. "This looks like where serial killers hang out." I tried to smile. "Well, it's mine now." "Lucky you," she deadpanned. We pulled up slowly, gravel crunching beneath the tires, and stepped out into the thick silence of the countryside. The house stood like an old soldier, scarred, forgotten, but still stubbornly upright. The porch creaked under our weight as we stepped onto it, and Jenny peeked through the dusty front window. "You're sure this place doesn't come with a tetanus shot?" I rolled my eyes but couldn't argue. The shutters were half-rotted. One of the columns holding the porch roof leaned at an unnatural angle. I reached for the rusted doorknob and hesitated. "I don't know what he was thinking," I said. "Leaving me this." Jenny shrugged. "Maybe he knew something you don't." We stepped inside, and dust danced in the sunlight cutting through broken blinds. The air smelled of mold and memory. The wooden floor groaned beneath us like it remembered us from years ago, barefoot summers and chasing fireflies down hallways that no longer looked familiar. I walked slowly through the rooms, each one echoing a life that had once been here. Our family's laughter, Dad's boots stomping in after a long day, the radio humming out old country songs in the kitchen. That version of the house was long gone. "Emily," Jenny called from the next room, "you might want to be careful." Her warning came too late. One step into what used to be the pantry and the floor gave out beneath me. I didn't even have time to scream. The crash was violent, wood splintering, dust exploding around me, pain shooting through my left leg like fire. I hit bottom in a cloud of filth and darkness, coughing, blinking. "EMILY," Jenny's voice echoed above, panic sharp and shrill. "I'm okay," I croaked, even though I wasn't sure. My leg throbbed, my elbow burned. I blinked again, trying to make sense of where I was. The cellar. Old stone walls rose up around me, slick with moisture and neglect. Broken shelves lined one wall, jars of something long decayed still sitting on them. Jenny's face appeared through the hole above. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No, wait, just give me a second," I gasped, waving her off weakly. My eyes adjusted. And that's when I saw it. In the far corner of the cellar, partly buried in the dirt floor, something glinted. I crawled toward it, dragging my aching leg. My fingers scraped across something cold and metallic. An old lockbox. I pulled it free, brushing away years of dust and cobwebs, heart hammering in my chest. It was heavy, solid, and locked. Jenny was shouting again, louder now. "You better not be dying down there while I'm calling 911. "I found something," I called back, a pause. "Like what? A raccoon skeleton, an old curse?" "No, a box. My dad must have hidden it." And suddenly the farm didn't feel like a punishment anymore. It felt like a riddle. The hospital room was white in the way only hospitals can be, so sterile it made the outside world feel like a distant memory. A cast weighed down my leg, and my left arm rested in a sling. I felt like a crumpled page someone had tried to smooth out and read again. Jenny sat beside me, flipping through a home renovation magazine and muttering to herself. She glanced up when I stirred. "Well, you've officially inherited a broken leg and tetanus," she quipped. "Your father really knew how to pick M." I offered a small laugh, then motioned to the weathered metal box sitting on the tray across my lap. It looked wildly out of place in such a clinical setting, like something that belonged in an attic, not under fluorescent lights. "I haven't opened it yet," I said quietly. Jenny leaned in. "Seriously, you've had it for hours." I wanted to wait. I didn't say what I really meant, that I was scared. That whatever was inside might confirm the worst, that my father left me a broken house and nothing more. Or maybe something different. My fingers trembled as I flicked the latch. It groaned, rusted but willing. Inside, everything was wrapped in old cloth, neat, deliberate. Someone had placed these contents with care. I unfolded the bundle to reveal a yellowed envelope on top, scrawled in my father's handwriting. "For Emily, my true legacy lies where truth is hidden." I blinked. Jenny sat up straighter. "Okay, that sounds like the beginning of a mystery novel. What's underneath?" I carefully pulled the rest of the cloth away. A small bank envelope with a safe deposit box key inside, a hand-drawn map, and a folded piece of paper titled simply, "CODES." I opened it slowly. There were 6 strange words listed, each underlined in his handwriting. I didn't recognize any of them, not as passwords, not as names, but something about them gave me chills. They weren't random. My father had planned this. "Okay," Jenny said, pulling her chair closer. "Now this is interesting. What's the map?" I unfolded the sketch. It showed a street layout downtown Raleigh. I recognized the block, 2 streets over from the old courthouse. Circled was a bank branch I'd passed 100 times but never entered. Beside it, he had written, "Ask for Manager O'Brien, show ID, use the codes." I exhaled, the weight of the box heavier now in my lap. "He knew," I said. "He knew Aaron would take everything." Jenny nodded slowly. "And he left you something no one else knew about." Tears pooled in my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. Because for the first time since the will was read, something made sense. He didn't abandon me. He protected me in secret. "Why not just put it in the official will?" I asked aloud, almost to myself. Jenny tilted her head. "Maybe because he knew Aaron would try to fight it, contest it. Or maybe he wanted you to be the only one who could follow the trail." I sat back against the stiff pillows, holding the note in my good hand. Truth hidden, legacy buried. My father had always loved puzzles, crosswords, riddles, even scavenger hunts when I was a kid. We used to spend entire afternoons solving them together. Aaron never had the patience. Now, even from beyond the grave, he was setting one final puzzle before me. But this time, it wasn't a game. This was war. A quiet kind of war. One fought not with screaming or lawyers, but with clues and hidden vaults and keys no one else could copy. "Guess we're going to the bank next," Jenny said with a mischievous smile. I looked over at her, still stunned, still trying to piece it all together. And despite the pain, despite the cast and sling, despite everything Aaron had taken, I smiled back. Because for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I felt chosen. 4 days later, I stood in the lobby of the Raleigh First Trust Bank, a crutch under one arm, Jenny by my side, and that map burning a hole in my purse. The polished floors echoed every awkward step I took, making me feel like the whole building was watching. Jenny leaned over and whispered, "This place smells like money and old secrets." I gave her a sideways glance, the corner of my mouth twitching. She wasn't wrong. At the front desk, a woman in a navy blazer looked up. "May I help you?" I steadied my voice. "I have an appointment. I was told to ask for Manager O'Brien." The woman gave a polite nod and disappeared behind a frosted glass door. Minutes later, a tall woman in a burgundy suit appeared, crisp and composed, with a silver name tag reading Margaret O'Brien. She extended a hand. "Miss Walker?" "Yes. I believe we've been expecting you." My breath caught in my throat. Expecting me. She led us past a security gate, down a quiet corridor of private rooms, and into a sleek office with mahogany cabinets and a small circular table. Once we were seated, she opened a folder already waiting on the desk. "This was arranged by your father, Frank Walker, roughly 5 months ago," she said. "He left strict instructions. You were the only person authorized to access this deposit box, and only with identification and a list of passcodes." I reached into my bag and slid the wrinkled paper across the table. She reviewed the codes with care. Then, without another word, she rose and motioned for us to follow. Down one more hallway, through a secure vault door that hissed open like something from a movie, and into a quiet chamber filled with rows and rows of small doors, each one hiding someone's secrets. Manager O'Brien unlocked one near the bottom. "This is it," she said softly. Inside was a thick leather folder. Nothing else. My heart thudded as I reached for it, holding my breath like it might vanish if I blinked too long. We returned to her office before opening it. Jenny stood beside me, silent now, uncharacteristically so. I slowly peeled back the cover. The first document was labeled, "Addendum to Last Will and Testament, Private Declaration to be accessed by Emily Walker only." I skimmed the first page. It was real, signed, witnessed, notarized. In it, my father detailed a second inheritance, one he'd chosen not to include in the formal will because, as he wrote in his own words, "Aaron is clever with lawyers, but you're clever with the truth. And the truth is, you've earned more than just land or title. You've earned my trust. And that's worth more than anything else I could leave behind." My hands trembled. Underneath the addendum was a certificate from a separate bank account. It showed a balance of $4.5 million, in my name alone. Jenny gasped beside me. My mouth went dry. Margaret O'Brien nodded. "Your father made significant deposits over several years. He was adamant it be hidden until the appropriate time." "Why me?" I whispered, even though I already knew. "Because he saw you," Jenny answered softly. "The way no one else did." I leaned back in the chair, stunned. It wasn't about the money, not entirely. It was the message. That while everyone else, Aaron, the lawyers, the family vultures, saw me as the forgotten daughter with nothing but a crumbling farmhouse, my father had seen something more. He'd known, planned, protected me, not loudly, not publicly, but with precision. I pressed the folder to my chest and closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel betrayed. I felt vindicated. I didn't tell a soul, not Aaron, not my mother, not the distant cousins suddenly offering shallow condolences. I kept the discovery sealed like a secret weapon strapped under my coat. Back in my quiet house, the leather folder rested inside the top drawer of my desk. Locked, hidden, sacred. The world still thought Emily Walker got left behind. I let them. I let Aaron believe he'd won. Let him swing his new office key like a trophy. Let the lawyers believe the will was final. Let the whispers swirl about the girl with the old farm and nothing else to show for her devotion. I had power now. Not just the kind that sits in a bank vault, but the kind that simmers just beneath the surface, waiting. I wanted to see what my brother would do when no one was watching but me. So I started watching. Every morning over breakfast, I scrolled through LinkedIn updates, Business Wire releases, and local trade forums. I created a burner account and joined industry chats under a pseudonym. I combed through interviews, digital newsletters, and executive memos with the curiosity of someone plotting a quiet war. It didn't take long to see the cracks. Aaron had stepped into Dad's role at Walker Timber like it was a reality show prize. First came the rebranding. Gone was the earthy, trust-built aesthetic our father had cultivated. In its place, sleek black and gold logos, glossy marketing jargon, and a launch party with influencers and catered sushi. Sushi. For a timber company. "He's trying to make it sexy," Jenny muttered one afternoon, flipping through the social media rollout. He's trying to make wood sexy. "He's selling flash," I said, watching Aaron pose in front of the Walker Timber sign with a smug grin and tailored suit. But what happens when someone asks for substance? I already knew the answer. The company had been built on relationships, multi-generational partnerships with contractors, lumber yards, and forest managers who valued handshake deals and legacy. Aaron had replaced all that with software dashboards and buzzwords like synergy and vertical expansion. He didn't understand the business. He just understood the inheritance. A week after the rebrand, he posted a photo of 2 new sports cars, a red Lamborghini and a silver Porsche, both angled for maximum drama in front of a rented villa. The caption read, "Hard work pays. Walker Timber 2, get on board or get out of the way." The comments were a mix of admiration and veiled confusion, but I saw what most didn't: desperation. He was trying too hard, spending too fast, and worst of all, he was drawing attention. On a small business forum, someone posted anonymously, "Anyone else noticing erratic spending and questionable leadership shifts at Walker Timber? New hires don't seem qualified." That comment lit a fire. Other users chimed in quiet at first, cautious. "He replaced 2 directors in the first month. He canceled our vendor contract with 0 explanation. Been trying to get invoices paid for weeks." I took screenshots, all of them, organized them by date, source, and topic. I created a spreadsheet. Then, too, Jenny peeked over my shoulder one evening and raised a brow. "You look like a woman who's about to blackmail a CEO." "I'm just gathering patterns." Patterns, totally normal behavior. But she didn't press. Jenny knew better than to poke the bear when the bear was building a case. By the 3rd week, Aaron had signed a sponsorship deal with a local golf tournament, donated to a flashy art museum gala, and hired a former college roommate as head of operations. That roommate's only previous experience, running a failed smoothie franchise. "Wow," Jenny muttered, scrolling the announcement on her phone. "Is he allergic to competence? He's allergic to being questioned." And still, I didn't act. I waited. Every day, I logged new signs of mismanagement. Every late vendor comment. Every confused client post. I started noticing that several old employees had quietly removed Walker Timber from their profiles entirely. That wasn't just a sign of departure. It was a sign of shame. Still, I kept my distance. No emails, no anonymous tips, no dramatic confrontations. Yet, instead, I paid a quiet visit to my father's old accountant, not to stir trouble, just to review a few things. "You know, Frank always said you had the better instincts," he told me, flipping through a folder of historical financials. "Said you see people the way they really are." That stayed with me for days, because that was the thing. My father knew Aaron would make a mess of it, but he also knew I wouldn't be driven by revenge. He trusted that I'd wait until Aaron buried himself, that I'd rebuild not just for legacy, but for integrity. And he was right. I wasn't planning a hostile takeover. I was planning something slower, smarter, deeper, something that wouldn't just humiliate my brother, it would redeem our name. 2 months after the funeral, the cracks turned into full-blown fractures. By then, Walker Timber's glossy rebrand had become a punchline in local circles. Contracts were slipping through Aaron's fingers like water, and trust, once our company's most valuable currency, had evaporated. But I didn't celebrate. I watched. Quietly. Deliberately. From the outside, I was still the forgotten daughter with a broken leg and a dusty farm. The kind of woman who gets invited to holiday dinners out of pity, not partnership. But I was building something in the silence, a slow, cold strategy. That strategy came to a head on a Monday afternoon. My phone rang while I was reviewing the latest tax documents with a legal assistant I'd hired anonymously through my lawyer. It was Aaron. I stared at the screen like it might catch fire. He hadn't called in years, not for birthdays, not when Dad was first hospitalized, not when I broke my leg, not until now. I answered on the third ring, careful to keep my voice calm. "Hello?" He said, his voice hoarse, panicked, and completely devoid of its usual bravado. I need to talk to you." My pulse stayed steady. I glanced out the window as I replied, "Well, this is a surprise." He didn't laugh. "I messed up," he said. "There were some investments. Timing was bad, the market. Look, it doesn't matter. I need help." I didn't respond. He took that as an invitation to beg. "There's a loan option on the table, but I need collateral and no one's biting. I thought maybe you could help me float a small bridge loan, just temporary. A month. A few weeks, even." I almost laughed, not at the request itself, but at the irony. For years, I'd been invisible. The daughter who showed up but was never invited in. The one he sneered at in that lawyer's office, spinning the company keys around like he'd won the lottery. And now he was calling me for salvation. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my tone smooth. "You want me to clean up your mess? It's not like that. Isn't it?" There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, heavy and shallow. "Look, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye," I cut him off. "You didn't even show up to say goodbye to Dad," I said quietly. That silence on the other end. It told me everything. I let it sit there. Let it stretch out and rot between us like a truth he'd never wanted to face. "I was busy," he finally muttered. "You think you know what it's like." "I do know," I said, cutting through his excuses like a knife through silk. "I was there, Aaron, every day, holding his hand while you posted pictures of luxury cars. So forgive me if I don't feel like bailing out your Instagram empire." He tried one last time. Please." And here's what I didn't do. I didn't yell. I didn't curse. I didn't slam the phone down in anger. I simply said, "You didn't need me at the funeral, remember?" Then I hung up. No speech. No warning, just a click. And silence. The kind of silence that burns deeper than any insult. The next day, I saw his face in a local business article, his expression strained, his tie crooked, his confidence cracked. The headline read, "Walker Timber struggles amidst financial turmoil, leadership under scrutiny." Jenny sent me the link with a single line. "Was this you?" I typed back, "Not yet, because this was just the beginning." If Aaron had been watching closely, he might have noticed the silence wasn't random. It was calculated. After I ended the call, I didn't block his number. I didn't send a follow-up text or gloat on social media. I let the silence hang. Let it gnaw at him. Let him sit in the wreckage of his own arrogance. Meanwhile, I got to work. Through my lawyer, Mark Temple, a quiet professional who asked no questions, I began the process of acquiring controlling interest in Walker Timber. Not openly. Not with my name on the paperwork. That would be too easy. No, I used a shell firm. 3, actually. Registered in different states. Managed by trust attorneys who'd seen this kind of thing before. On the surface, it looked like a standard acquisition move, an investor group swooping in to salvage a struggling legacy business. No one in the public would know the buyer's identity until the ink dried. Aaron certainly didn't. Weeks passed, and I kept tabs on every desperate decision he made. His social media grew quieter, his photos less flashy. Gone were the suits and champagne toasts. Now he posted motivational quotes about resilience, grit, and pushing through the storm. The layoffs began soon after. First, it was the junior staff, then the vendors. Offices downsized, contracts canceled, assets quietly listed for sale. Walker Timber was dying, not from market conditions, from neglect. Aaron had lit the match the day he laughed off Dad's hospice room. Now he was watching it burn from the inside. Still, I waited. On a crisp Friday morning in early October, my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. "Deal approved. Official transfer Monday. You're in." I stared at the screen, letting the words sink in. I had done it. Without a single confrontation, without a courtroom, without a raised voice. I owned the company now. Or rather, the entity I controlled did. And Aaron, he didn't know a thing. That weekend, Jenny and I walked the property line at East Ridge, our boots crunching through brittle leaves. She tossed a rock toward the broken fence and said, "So, what's the plan?" I smiled, pulling my jacket tighter. "We show up. That's it, no press release, no dramatic letter opener with a speech. Not yet." She tilted her head. "You ever think about how weird it is that he's still out there thinking he won and you're just holding this card like a queen with a poker face?" I looked out at the old barn. The place was still falling apart, but now it felt different. It was no longer what I'd been left with. It was what I'd risen from. "He's going to walk into that boardroom Monday morning thinking it's just another crisis to smooth over," I said, "and then I'll be there." Jenny grinned. "Reckon I should bring popcorn. You'll want a front row seat." I spent the next 2 days organizing transition documents, rehearsing statements, reading over financials I already knew by heart. I wasn't just showing up for revenge. I was showing up to rebuild, to lead, to finish what my father started, what he entrusted me to finish. I didn't sleep much Sunday night. Nerves, anticipation, a little fear, but mostly resolve. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is wait, and then walk into the room no one thought she belonged in and take the seat that was hers all along. Monday morning dawned cold and sharp, the kind of day that made everything feel freshly cut, like the edges of the world had been honed overnight. I dressed deliberately. Black tailored suit, crisp white blouse. My hair pulled back, lips painted the same muted red I wore to Dad's memorial. Not flashy, not soft, just precise. Jenny picked me up right on time. She took one look at me and nodded. "You look like someone who owns something." I smiled. "That's because I do." The drive downtown was quiet. Neither of us said much, but the air buzzed with something unspoken. Jenny parked near the building and I stepped out, heels clicking against the concrete like punctuation. The Walker Timber headquarters stood tall but tired. It looked better than it was, kind of like Aaron. At the reception desk, I gave my name, calmly stating, "I have a meeting scheduled with the board. They're expecting the new principal partner." The receptionist blinked. She didn't recognize me, why would she? But she checked the file and paled slightly. "Of course. One moment, please." Security escorted me to the top floor. As the elevator doors opened, I saw Aaron through the glass wall of the boardroom, standing at the head of the table, hands on his hips, running his mouth about something I couldn't hear. He didn't see me yet, but he would. Mark, my lawyer, fell into step beside me in the hallway. "You ready?" I nodded. "More than." We entered without knocking. The room hushed instantly. The board of directors, all 6 of them, turned to stare. Some looked confused. A few shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Aaron froze mid-sentence, his face slowly contorting into disbelief. I stepped forward, placed my briefcase on the table, and met his eyes head-on. "Good morning," I said coolly. "I believe introductions are in order." Aaron blinked. What is this?" Mark slid a folder across the table. "This is documentation of a controlling interest transfer, approved Friday and finalized this morning. As of today, Ms. Emily Walker is the majority owner of Walker Timber." The silence that followed was volcanic. Aaron's voice cracked as he fumbled. "This has to be a joke." I folded my arms. "The joke was thinking you could destroy everything Dad built and walk away untouched." He looked to the board, searching for support, but found none. They stared back at him with the thin-lipped neutrality of people who see a ship take on water and realize they need a lifeboat. "You can't do this," he hissed. "You don't have the experience." "No," I said, "but I have the receipts." I pulled out a small packet, summaries of his spending, screenshots from the forums, internal complaints I had quietly gathered from anonymous sources. I didn't need to yell. I just laid the truth on the table, page by page. "And more importantly," I added, "I have Dad's vision, the one you spit on." Aaron stepped back like he'd been slapped. "You think this makes you better?" he asked, eyes flashing. "You think this stunt gives you some kind of moral high ground?" "No," I said calmly, "but it gives me the power to fix what you broke." The room was so still, I could hear the faint buzz of the overhead lights. He stood there, deflated. A man whose empire had just crumbled in the space of a single sentence. And I had never felt more clear, more seen, more my father's daughter. No one moved. Aaron still stood at the head of the boardroom table, breathing hard, like if he just puffed his chest enough, He might scare me back into the shadows where he thought I belonged. But that era of me being the quiet one, the forgotten one, was over. I placed one hand on the table and said, clearly and without hesitation, "I'm calling an emergency shareholder meeting. Now." One of the board members, Mr. Hendricks, who used to play golf with my father, shifted in his seat. "Ms. Walker, that's highly irregular, but legal," Mark, my attorney, interrupted smoothly. "Given her majority stake and recent approval from the acquisition committee, she has every right to call a meeting immediately." Another board member, a woman named Elaine, whose expression had been unreadable until now, gave a slight nod. "I think we've seen enough to justify that." The room moved as if underwater, slowly, warily. Papers shuffled, chairs adjusted. Aaron was frozen in place. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head. "You're trying to humiliate me." "No," I said. "I'm trying to save the company." Mark handed out packets, thick with evidence: financial mismanagement, contract cancellations, asset mishandling, internal HR complaints. Most damning of all was the timeline. How, in just under 10 weeks, Aaron had burned through more than half the operational liquidity on vanity hires, promotional stunts, and luxury, client meetings in resorts no client had attended. As the room reviewed the papers, I watched Aaron's shoulders slump. Then came my final blow. "I'm filing a motion with the board to strip Aaron Walker of all executive authority, effective immediately. Per company bylaws, the majority owner may motion for leadership reappointment when fiduciary failure is demonstrated." "You can't," Aaron's voice cracked again. I turned to him fully, not with venom, with finality. "You didn't just ruin the company," I said. "You disrespected our father's name, you disrespected me." He tried to respond, but nothing came out. "Emily," he said, voice suddenly smaller, "I was wrong. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I've learned my lesson." The room was watching me now. Every eye, every breath, waiting. But I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I looked to Mark, gave a single nod, and he turned to security, already briefed. 2 officers entered silently. Aaron's face drained of color. "Wait, what? No, I can leave on my own. This isn't necessary." But they didn't lay a hand on him. They simply followed as he collected his jacket, eyes darting between the board and me, hoping for someone to defend him. No one did. As he reached the door, he turned one last time. "Dad would hate you for this." That stopped me for only a breath. Then I met his gaze and said, "No, Dad made sure I could do this." He stared a moment longer, and then he was gone. Silence filled the boardroom like fog. I turned back to the table. "We begin tomorrow with an audit. We clean this up. We rebuild with transparency, with integrity, with the name Walker meaning something again." A few board members nodded. Elaine even gave a small, respectful smile. And just like that, it was done. I didn't cheer. I didn't collapse. I just stood tall, heart steady. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about restoration. And finally, it was mine to do. 1 year later, Walker Timber didn't just survive. It became something better. The change didn't happen overnight. There was no movie montage miracle, no magic fix. It was slow, sometimes agonizing. The kind of rebuilding that tested more than just patience. It tested belief. We started with the staff. I met with every department, face to face, not in a conference room but on their turf, warehouse floors, loading docks, quiet corners of the office where no one ever took time to listen. I asked hard questions and heard harder truths. They told me about the unpaid invoices, the scrapped retirement benefits, the fake bonus structure Aaron had dangled like candy then yanked away. There was bitterness in their voices, rightfully so, but underneath it all, there was still something more valuable than loyalty: hope. So I did what Dad would have done. I stopped talking and started acting. We restructured contracts with our oldest vendors, the ones Aaron had discarded like they were disposable. We offered back pay to employees who'd gone months without bonuses they were promised. I reinstated our original mission statement, one written by my father in blue pen in 1989, and had it framed in the lobby where no one could miss it. "Legacy isn't just what you leave behind," it said. "It's how you carry what was given." And I carried it, every single day. I still had doubts. Still stared at balance sheets at 2am, wondering if I was doing enough, fast enough. Still wondered if Dad would have handled it differently. better. But each quarter, the numbers started to stabilize. Our name began to mean something again. Not because of flashy posts or golf tournament sponsorships, but because people could trust us again. As for Aaron, he sold his cars. He moved out of the penthouse he couldn't afford and took a job entry-level at a construction logistics firm 2 towns over. Jenny found his updated LinkedIn profile and texted me. Aaron Walker, project coordinator. Huh. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I felt something closer to peace. I never responded to his calls. There weren't many, just 1 or 2 short voicemails, vague apologies, but I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. Sometimes people learn their lesson too late for it to matter. One afternoon, Jenny and I sat outside the old farmhouse. We'd spent months fixing it up, shutters replaced, porch leveled, new paint the color of soft clay. She took a sip of her wine and said, "You ever think about what would have happened if your dad hadn't left you that box?" I nodded. All the time. And then I remember it wasn't just about the box. She raised a brow. "He gave me the tools," I said, "but I built the rest. I earned it." She smiled. "Yeah, you really did." That night, I stood in the hallway where the floor had once collapsed beneath me. It was solid now, reinforced, quiet, just like me. The sky was the soft kind of blue you only get in October, washed out and bright, like the world had taken a breath and decided to forgive itself. I stood at the edge of the cemetery with a bouquet of sunflowers in one hand and the wind lifting my coat just enough to remind me of the season. Dad's headstone hadn't changed. Simple, unadorned. Just the name Franklin R. Walker, the years of his life, and that phrase we'd agreed on after his passing. Honor is what you build when no one's watching. I knelt slowly, setting the sunflowers down beside the others. Some had started to wilt. I didn't replace them. He would have appreciated that. Life moves on, but you don't forget who helped you grow. I ran my fingers over the engraved letters the way I used to trace blueprints when I was little, watching his big hands guide mine. "Hey, Dad," I whispered. "I kept my promise." The wind stirred through the trees, scattering dry leaves like confetti. "You didn't raise a fool," I said. "You didn't raise someone who quits." I stayed there a while, long enough for the shadows to shift and the quiet to settle around me like a blanket. So much had changed. Aaron was working hard for the first time in his life, clocking in at 7 a.m. and driving a used truck to a job that didn't know his last name used to be painted on the side of a building. Jenny had started a small design firm, helping local businesses with branding that actually meant something. No smoke, no mirrors, and me. I was still running the company, but more than that, I was finally living. There were nights now with real sleep, not just restlessness. Weekends that weren't soaked in bitterness. I'd started hiking again, started laughing at things that weren't bitterly ironic. Even dated someone for a while, a quiet, kind man who liked old records and asked real questions. It didn't last, but it reminded me I could still feel something other than survival. The truth is, I didn't just reclaim a business. I reclaimed myself, and I'd never let anyone steal that from me again. Before I stood to leave, I brushed a few leaves from the headstone and said, "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did." The wind answered again, this time softer. I walked back to the car with that peace still settling around me. Not loud, not triumphant, just whole. Because sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it comes with quiet dignity, earned the hard way. And if you're lucky, it comes with sunflowers. Thank you for watching this story unfold. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and tell me, have you ever been underestimated only to rise stronger? I'd love to hear your story. Until next time, stay resilient, stay true, and never forget what you're capable of.